Enforcement Agency. Sick burn, Zoni. But he didn't stop there. Penzoni said that there's no scientific evidence that items like pink underwear benefit the community or reduce recidivism.
Nice.
However, he did say...
Are we good to go?
Okay, yeah.
I was trying to find another word for recidivism. I couldn't find an easy one. This is 5 on 20 News, where the news is wild and the newscasters are crazy, with Joel Foster
and Nick Marquez. It's Friday, March 31st, and we're coming to you live from the Creative Tucson studio in downtown Tucson. First, let's talk local headlines.
An Arizona rep argued in favor of cracking down on sanctuary cities in response to statements made by Attorney General Jeff Sessions earlier this week. On Tuesday, the House Judiciary Subcommittee held a hearing called Restoring Enforcement of Our Nation's Immigration Laws. At the hearing, Arizona Republican Andy Biggs brought up the murder of Grant Ronnebeck, a 21-year-old convenience store clerk who was shot by an undocumented immigrant over a pack of cigarettes. He further pled his case by claiming that loose enforcement of immigration laws led to the release of 3,600 convicted immigrants in Maricopa County over a 15-month period. Biggs said, quote, "We know they are criminally violent, but they were released without being deported." But what he forgot to mention is that most of these thousands of individuals weren't convicted of violent offenses, but rather for minor crimes and misdemeanors, like, say, lying to Congress. Democrats fought back against Biggs' fear-mongering, with Illinois Rep. Luis Gutierrez stating that the arguments focus on the, quote, demonization of immigrant communities. He said those looking to punish sanctuary cities are only looking for political points and aren't really concerned about solving the immigration problem in the country. Other speakers argued that the crackdown would not make the country safer, but rather would have the opposite effect. Archie Payette, the chief of policy for the Tahiri Justice Center, said that the crackdown has had a, quote, chilling effect on immigrant communities because many people are now too scared of deportation to report crimes. The hearing came as a result of the Trump administration's policy towards sanctuary cities, which denies funds to the cities if they refuse to enforce federal immigration laws. The policy stems from an executive action signed by Trump back in February, part of a nationwide immigration crackdown.
After taking on the president, Paul Ryan, then Kim Jong-un, now it's George Washington's turn to get McCained. Arizona Senator John McCain is calling for the elimination of the paper dollar to be replaced by dollar coins, similar to what's found in Europe, Canada, and pretty much everywhere else in the world. Along with fellow Senator Mike Enzi of Wyoming, McCain reintroduced legislation that would take the paper dollar out of circulation and save the country up to $16 billion over 30 years. The Currency Optimization, Innovation, and National Savings, or COIN Act, get it, would also change the composition of the nickel to a lighter and less expensive form and get rid of the penny for 10 years. McCain said that at a time when we're $20 trillion in debt, Congress must protect the American taxpayer. Similar bills have been introduced before with nothing to show. Jim Colby of Arizona first proposed it in 1991. This would be McCain's third attempt to get rid of the dollar. The legislation mentions 10 government accountability studies showing the benefits of switching from paper dollars to coins. In March, the GAO also found that the move would save $16 billion, with the biggest savings coming from the longevity of the coins, which can last over 30 years. A paper dollar bill only lasts about 5 years. The report also found that stopping the production of pennies would save $1 billion over 10 years. Under the McCain-Enzi bill, pennies would still be used, but wouldn't be minted anymore, so prices wouldn't need to be rounded like they are in other countries that have eliminated the penny. Colby, the original bill's author, says that a bill like this is difficult to pass because of the inertia factor. This means that it's difficult to get people to change their ways, both in habits and because of production. He also said that a paper dollarless world would be more difficult to make it rain in the club because it's painful and dangerous.
Yesterday, an Arizona federal judge ruled that the federal government needs to reconsider endangered species protection for the pygmy owl. There are reportedly less than 50 of these small owls in Arizona, including some in the southern part of the state. Environmentalists say that urban sprawl, invasive species, drought, and fires have contributed to the animals' dwindling numbers. From 1997 to 2006, pygmy owls were considered endangered and protected under the law, but a lawsuit by developers took them off the list. Then a 2011 decision by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service again determined that the owl no longer needed to be protected under the Endangered Species Act. They were challenged by the Center for Biological Diversity in that case, which is what prompted this week's decision. The pygmy owl is one of the animals singled out to be impacted by the big, sexy border wall because of their migratory patterns could be interrupted. To solve the problem, Homeland Security Chief John Kelly plans to don a pygmy owl costume and lead the birds to safety across the border into Mexico. At that point, it'll be Mexico's problem.
Maricopa County Sheriff Paul Penzoni will discontinue the practice of having prisoners wear pink underwear, dealing a blow to former Sheriff Joe Arpaio's legacy. Penzoni told KTAR News that he ordered a new batch of tighty-whities in an effort to get back to, quote, being a serious law enforcement agency. Sick burn, Zoni. But he didn't stop there. Penzoni said that there's no scientific evidence that items like pink underwear benefit the community or reduce recidivism. However, he did say they will use the pink underwear until they're no longer good, which might work. Because the only thing worse for a convicted criminal than wearing pink underwear is wearing ratty, worn-out pink underwear. The sheriff did not speculate the current 12-person committee who are studying the tent cities, another Arpaio gem, which involved housing prisoners in outdoor tents. Arpaio was criticized for the practice because temperatures were shown to exceed 115 degrees and many of the tents had non-working fans. The commission will deliver a report on the tent cities and help decide whether Maricopa County still wants to use the practice. But Penzoni seems eager to scrape off any vestige of Arpaio, as he said that he wants to put Arpaio's reign in the, quote, rearview mirror. But racist old Joe won't go down without a fight. Arpaio faces court charges in April for disobeying a judge's ruling and may spend time in jail. In the meantime, Sheriff's Office staff has seen a figure lurking in the woods near the station, wearing pink underwear and mumbling racist slurs.
Here's some encouraging news for democracy. A report released yesterday says that 40,000 voter registration forms in Maricopa County were left sitting in a box before the 2016 election. Under Proposition 200, Arizona voting forms need to have proof of citizenship attached, or the registration is considered invalid. The forms found in the box did not have attached proof. Current county recorder Adrian Fontes said that the registrations are thrown in the box if there was no proof of citizenship, and the voter is then sent a letter requesting more information. However, he said there's no evidence that the previous recorder, Helen Purcell, followed up on these letters. Fontes says that his office will begin taking the information from these 40,000 voting forms and plugging them into the voter database. There, they'll be able to compare the information with other agencies to determine citizenships, which seems like it should have been done before the 2016 election. He said that the process wouldn't be registering people to vote, but rather scrapping the registrations that do not return proof of citizenship. The same report also revealed that about 168 votes were counted twice in the November 8th election due to an electronic system intended to replace paper votes, so it could be updated in real time. However, Fontes says that it doesn't seem to have affected the election results. But this didn't stop Donald Trump from immediately calling for another investigation into voter fraud in Arizona. If the twice counted votes were for Trump, however, the investigation will be immediately called off and another investigation will be called to investigate the first investigation. Whatever keeps the Russians out of the news.
And if that last story had you disliking former county recorder Helen Purcell, this one will pour salt on the wound. Maricopa County Recorder Adrian Fontes says that Purcell caused the massive voting lines that plagued Arizona polls in the 2016 election. He says that Purcell decided to reduce the amount of polling places without consulting her staff, which led to lines that had some people waiting for more than 5 hours. Purcell made the decision to reduce the number of polls from 200 in 2012 because of an increase in mail-in ballots and a lack of funding. Her staff thought that the remaining polls would be so-called mega polling sites with 10 to 15 times the resources to handle the influx of voters. But Fontes found that this plan was, quote, wholly inadequate. Fontes says that he wants to avoid situations like these in the future by working closely with staff and the public. In the meantime, Fontes is asking for $11.8 million to help fund more positions in the county recorder's office.
And I want to take a moment to talk to you about the program you're watching right now. Here at 5 on 20, we're undertaking a new kind of citizen journalism. We're going to give you the news as we see it. And we want more people to speak up with us. We need writers, hosts, anchors, camera people, sound people, the whole gamut. The times require a new way of informing ourselves, so join us. Do it. Do it now. Email us at info@creativetucson.org to get involved. And if you think there's a story we're missing, a person we should interview, an upcoming event we should cover, or have any news tips for us, shoot us an email at info@creativetucson.org. We're here for you, and we want to cover all stories from all points of view. So please don't be strangers. Now, in national and international news.
Mike Pence dealt a tie-breaking vote yesterday to approve a law that gives states permission to withhold funds from Planned Parenthood. Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who both have long opposed funding cuts to Planned Parenthood, opposed the legislation. Collins said that she didn't think that federal family planning funds should be subjected to state restrictions. She also said that there are already rules against using federal funds for abortion, so the law is largely meaningless. Democratic Senator Patty Murray said that the law is, quote, cruel and would have the greatest impact on women and families who need it the most. The Planned Parenthood vote erases an Obama-era rule last December that blocked states from blocking Title X family planning grants healthcare providers that offer abortion. Title X funding includes services such as contraception, STD screenings, and other treatments, but cannot be used for abortion services. Republican Senator Johnny Isakson was also brought in for a vote, despite recovering from back surgery. Good to know that he'll bravely battle bodily pain in order to deny women health funding. Isakson will also be needed next week for the vote on Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch. According to his spokesman, Isakson was cleared by his doctors to travel to D.C. for one day. In order to have him carry out the vote, Senate Republicans plan to help Isakson deal with the pain by fitting him with an apparatus, seen here.
It looks as though human rights are so 2016. The Pentagon received permission to launch more aggressive airstrikes in Somalia, officials announced yesterday. Dalton Trumbo's decision allows U.S. Special Operations Forces to join Somali National Army troops and their African allies, which will enable them to respond to airstrikes requests faster. Parts of southern Somalia, not including the capital city of Mogadishu, are now designated as a war zone. This gives U.S. forces the authority to call in offensive airstrikes rather than waiting for approval from higher officials. Jeff Davis, a Pentagon spokesman, said that it will, quote, increase pressure on al-Shabaab and reduce the risk to our partner forces. Al-Shabaab is the terrorist group in Somalia that is loosely affiliated with al-Qaeda. Somalia has lacked a functioning government for the past 20 years, which created a vacuum for groups like al-Shabaab to take power. There are currently around 50 U.S. commandos that cycle in and out of Somalia, but this number could increase slightly, according to Pentagon officials. However, they denied criticisms that the new rules would increase civilian killings because the policy has worked so well so far in Yemen, where hundreds of civilians have already been killed in the past few weeks after combat rules were loosened. But officials say that the easing of rules of engagement have not been made in Somalia. That will likely come next week when we're busy worrying about the latest chapter of the Russian spy novel playing out in our government. The new policy in Somalia hopes to contain one of the most devastated countries in the world and unite their people against one cause, destroying the United States. Pentagon officials expect the military operations to create thousands of new terrorists by ceaselessly bombing their country and new levels of hatred against the U.S. in the name of Somalian unity.
Israel's security cabinet announced yesterday that the country would move forward on the first settlement construction in Palestinian territory in 20 years. The settlement will be built near the Palestinian city of Ramallah and is meant for those Israelis who had to evacuate from Amona, which was destroyed by Israeli authorities because it was not sanctioned. The cabinet also announced plans to build 2,000 homes inside existing settlements. This is part of the plan approved 2 months ago that would increase settlements by over 5,000 homes. The plan was approved soon after Trump won the presidency, after Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu grew confident that Trump would be an enthusiastic backer of Israel. And he was right. Palestinian Liberation Organization Committee member Hanan Ashrawi condemned the decision. He said that Israelis' policies remain unchanged and that Netanyahu and his, quote, extremist racist coalition continue to persist within their policies of apartheid and ethnic cleansing. Back in December, the UN Security Council officially condemned the plans to expand settlements, a decision condemned by Republicans, including Trump. However, Trump also has called on Israel to, quote, hold back on expanding settlements, although he didn't deliver any sort of consequences if his words were ignored, which they clearly were. In the meantime, the Trump administration is trying to figure out a way to pin this on Obama somehow so Trump doesn't look like a total punk.
Democracy took a big hit in South America yesterday. It began in Venezuela, where the pro-government Supreme Court took over legislative powers from the opposition-ruled Congress. This means that Socialist President Nicolas Maduro will be able to consolidate more power over his opponents as the country lurches further towards a dictatorship. The judges ruled that Congress were in contempt of court because they were hindering efforts to revive the economy, which has suffered from record inflation, leading to food shortages and a healthcare crisis. To protest the move, Peru recalled its ambassador and promised to increase efforts to get Venezuela out of the Organization of American States, or the OAS. The U.S. also condemned the judge's move, calling it an effort to, quote, usurp the powers of the National Assembly. President Maduro lost control of Congress in December of 2015 when voters got sick of the crashing economy and handed him his largest election defeat so far. Since then, Congress and the president have clashed, leading to Maduro stopping a recall referendum from moving forward last year. Even the Pope wasn't able to bring the two sides peace, as he visited over the summer to try and quell the tension, but to no avail. The Pope ended up saying screw it, then boarded the Pope copter to Cuba. Opposition members in Venezuela are now calling for street demonstrations to battle what they call a, quote, self-coup. But Maduro maintains that it's all a conspiracy by the U.S. to take Venezuela's plentiful supply of oil. Imagine a president using conspiracy theories to justify his power grabs. They're so backwards over there.
Crazy to think.
Right? Yeah, unbelievable.
But it wasn't just Venezuela that was suffering the democracy blues. Paraguay also fears the creep of dictatorship, as President Horacio Cartes is looking to amend the Constitution to give him increasing powers. Cartes is looking to change the Constitution so he can be re-elected in 2018, which is causing fear in the South American nation that suffered 30 years under the dictator Alfredo Stroessner. Members of the opposition right-wing Colorado Party opposed the measure, along with a group of left-wing progressives. Polls show that nearly 80% of the country's voters oppose Cartes's plan. Paraguay's last president, left-wing Fernando Lugo, was impeached in 2012 and comes from the same party as Cartes. The party, unsurprisingly, has thrown their support behind Cartes's attempt to run for re-election.
Muslim children are more likely to be bullied in school than kids of other faiths, according to a study by the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding. The study found that 42% of Muslim children reported being bullied in K-12 schools, compared with 23% of Jewish children and 20% of Protestant children. The study aligns with theories that the 2016 election may have contributed to an uptick in bullying among school children in the U.S. Maureen Costello, director of the Teaching Tolerance Program at the Southern Poverty Law Center, sent a questionnaire to thousands of educators across the country. Over 90% of educators said that the school climate had been negatively affected by the election. Costello said that, quote, the elephant in the room was that Mr. Trump's campaign had an effect. The SPLC study dubbed this the Trump effect, which refers to comments the president made about immigrants and minorities on the campaign trail. I can't wait until the Trump effect chapter in history books appears, and I applaud the kid who doesn't pass future high school because he fails the test. If you're watching this, you're our only hope. Ron Avi Astor, a professor at USC, said the survey results didn't surprise him. Astor said that there is a, quote, a generalized climate of permission to say hateful things to groups that are deemed different. And beyond the Neither World news, even Richard Nixon is spinning in his grave at this point. But maybe more disturbing is that the study found 1 in 4 Muslim bullying incidents involved teachers and school officials. No, not maybe disturbing, definitely disturbing. Even worse is an ACLU complaint involving an 11-year-old Somali refugee who was repeatedly discriminated against by his Arizona teacher. According to the ACLU complaint, the teacher told the student, quote, I can't wait until Trump is elected. He's going to deport all you Muslims. Yikes. Kids in the class reportedly took the teacher's lead and began calling the child a terrorist and accusing him of wanting to bomb the school. The teacher was later awarded Arizona Teacher of the Year by Representative Sonny Borelli. Despite the rise in bullying amongst Muslim students, the report found that the top bullied student was Greg. Stop trying so hard, Greg.
EPA Chief Scott Pruitt has decided not to ban the pesticide chlorpyrifos. Despite warnings from scientists that can cause birth defects, In 2015, the EPA advised the Obama administration to ban the chemical because they claimed that it interfered with fetal brain and nervous system development. They found that children of farm workers were suffering high rates of learning, memory, and behavioral problems. Dow Chemical committed to changing the EPA's opinion by lobbying the Obama administration, which held off on banning the pesticide. As of last July, the EPA still maintained that chlorpyrifos should be prohibited. Pruitt released a statement that defended his decision, writing, quote, "We need to provide regulatory certainty to the thousands of American farms that rely on chlorpyrifos." By rejecting the ban, Pruitt took so-called final agency action, which means that the matter won't be revisited until 2022, the year when the mutants start to take over.
This was Joel Foster
And Nick Marquez. For 5 on 20 News, next up, Joel will guide you through the recent media maelstrom.
right, welcome to This Week in Mediocrity, where we present you with all the best in the worst of the media. I'm your host, Joel Foster, and I want to be blamed for the healthcare bill failing, just to be part of the club. This week was normal enough in that we saw our president pick fights with pretty much everyone in what I can only assume was an homage to Patrick Swayze in Roadhouse.
Sorry, we're closed.
Well, then what are all these people doing here?
Drinking and having a good time.
Well, that's why we're here.
You're too stupid to have a good time.
Yeah, attempted murder is the coolest. Trump unsurprisingly called out Democrats for the health care bills failing, but a bit more surprising was he had major beef with fellow Republicans, specifically those in the Conservative Freedom Caucus. Even more specifically, Reps Raul Labrador, Mark Meadows, and Jim Jordan, who Trump tweeted at directly. The reps didn't respond on Twitter, but are writing a diss track that they'll release next week on YouTube and SoundCloud. Cannot wait. But Trump saved his thickest pile of hate for the New York Times, who for Trump is like a combination of Rosie O'Donnell, Chuck Schumer, the Constitution, and chapter books. He's dubbed the Times the failing New York Times, continuing his knack for lazy superlatives. Crooked Hillary, Lion Ted. Say what you want about the guy, but he's unrivaled when it comes to clever nicknames. It began when he posted this tweet where he gave some advice to the failing New York Times that he's in saying that they would do much better if they were honest. With a 35% approval rating, maybe the president should use his own advice. Then the next day, the president took us down memory lane and asked us, remember when the failing New York Times apologized to its subscribers right after the election because of their coverage was so wrong? Of course, ending the question with an exclamation point, which docked him 10 points off his final grade. Ah yes, I remember those times. So simple back then, before every environmental protection rule was overturned, before we were blasted with constitutional violations every week, before bad and bougie. That was back when America was still great. We should really get someone to make America great again. But if you do remember, the Times didn't actually apologize, but simply said that they underestimated the amount of support for Trump among American voters. See, like many of us, the Times had more faith in America to think that we'd be duped by a walking, talking pair of Hooters shorts who doesn't appear to understand how his native language works. But it didn't matter, because our ADD-addled circus peanut president moved on to his next gripe the next day. This time, he called out fake news, asking why they aren't covering, quote, Podesta ties to Russia as covered by Fox News or money from Russia to Clinton. Sale of uranium? They might not be covering it because Hillary isn't president. I thought us snowflakes were supposed to get over it and accept that Trump is president. Well, we did. And now the press challenges the president. That's kind of how it works. But for the hell of it, let's investigate what he's talking about. And it just so happens that Breitbart helped us out by posting a bunch of stories about the issue before and after Trump sent the tweet. What a coincidence. The articles were mostly about how Representative Louis Gohmert called for an investigation into the Podesta Russia links. In case you forgot, Louis Gohmert is the guy who says these things.
For our civilized history, a man that didn't know which he was pitied, loved, encouraged, but educated people said, that's perverse. That's basically the most widely used where the word perverse was most widely used.
Yes, and those civilized people also thought of black people as property, and that using leeches would suck out evil spirits. Although to be fair, Louis Gohmert does like to leech himself on the weekends. Oh, but Louis wasn't done breaking it down for us uncivilized folk. Let's hear his idea for next summer's blockbuster sci-fi movie.
I mean, I really wonder how many people in this body who had the ultimate power to decide whether humanity would go forward or not, whether it was an asteroid coming, something that would end humanity on Earth as dinosaurs were ended at one time. Okay, we've got a spaceship that can go, as Matt Damon did in the movie, plant a colony somewhere. We can have humans survive this terrible disaster about to befall. If you could decide what 40 people you put on the spacecraft that would save humanity, how many of those would be same-sex couples?
Well, Louis, if you represent humanity, I would pick all same-sex couples because maybe humanity should end for their own good. So what is Trump talking about? Let's start with Podesta. As you probably know, John Podesta was Hillary's campaign manager, who was then outed by WikiLeaks as being a UFO enthusiast who's friends with Tom DeLonge of Blink-182. But loving pop punk isn't his only bad decision. He's also on the board of Jules Unlimited, a Massachusetts-based solar company. Also on the board is Russian banker Anatoly Chubai, who joined a few months after Podesta. Funny enough, Chubai also sits on the board of TMK, a Russian steel company who will benefit from the Dakota Access Pipeline. So he's everybody's friend. So this is the Podesta connection, that's it. Keep in mind that Jules is an American company. Pretty weak conspiracy, right? But what about the sale of uranium, which Trump mentions like he's making suggestions for next week's executive order? Sale of uranium? What do you think? Well, this goes back to 2011, when Hillary was a fresh-faced Secretary of State. She was one of 9 federal agency heads who approved a Russian purchase of a controlling stake of the company Uranium One, an international mining company headquartered in Canada, but who also operates in the US. But because it operates here, Russia wouldn't be able to export their uranium back to Russia, which the president must have forgot to mention. According to PolitiFact, it's more likely that Russia wanted to buy a piece of the company because of their operations in Kazakhstan, the world's #1 producer of uranium, and Borat jokes. So what's the issue here? Where's the conspiracy? Well, it seems that investors in the Uranium One deal had long-term relationships with Bill Clinton and gave money to the Clinton Foundation. But as PolitiFact points out, most of the donations occurred before Hillary was even Secretary of State. So unless these guys can see the future, which I'm sure Trump will tweet next week, there's not really anything there, much like Trump's chin. And yeah, it does seem a bit sketchy, but Trump should be the last person accusing someone of having conflicts of interest. It's like the pot calling the kettle orange. Okay, so what does this have to do with us? Why are we talking about Hillary? Well, after his Twitter airstrike on the Times, Trump finally delivered the crushing blow with this tweet where he suggested that libel laws should be changed. Here's where it gets scary. If libel laws were changed, this means that news organizations could be sued for writing something that the president considers to be untrue. Of course, the case would be eventually dismissed, but this is part of the Trump strategy. Drag people into court and bleed them dry until they give up. His approach to governing is kind of like farting under the covers and holding your little brother's head under there until he tells you that you're king. Sure, these tweets are silly and they should be ignored, until they're not. Which is kind of like Trump's campaign. We laughed and we ignored it until it became serious, when it was too late. So once again, do your research and please look beyond the tweet. That's all my time today. This has been the Department of Mediocrity and I'm Joel Foster. I will see you next week. Have a wonderful weekend.